Before dawn over Crimea, a coordinated drone raid used decoys and radar disruption to strike Belbek Air Base, reportedly disabling 2 Su-27s.
December 27, 3:30 a.m. Over Belbek Air Base in Crimea, the night looks routine from the perimeter. The runway lights are muted, shelters sit sealed, and the air defense posture feels like it has settled into a familiar rhythm again. That timing is the point. The strike does not come on New Year's Day or during a peak alert news cycle. It comes later, after habits return and crews start trusting the quiet. Belbek is not just an airfield. It is a protected node inside a layered bubble, with long-range coverage, point defense systems, and radar feeds meant to prevent any low-altitude surprise from reaching the hardstand. Inside that bubble, Su-27 fighters represent more than hardware. They represent the ability to project air power across Crimea on short notice. The opening move is not a direct hit. Ukrainian planners use a first wave designed to reshape Russian attention, not to destroy anything yet. A set of decoy UAVs pushes into the approach corridors with radar reflectors meant to exaggerate their signature and manipulate classification. On the scopes, those decoys do not read like cheap drones. They read like targets worth stopping, and that forces a predictable response. When defenders commit to the obvious track, they also reveal habits. Which sectors light up first? Which launchers swivel? Which radars linger too long on one thread? That is when the second layer moves. A smaller set of strike drones approaches on a different logic, staying low and minimizing what electronic warfare systems can disrupt. They are not trying to win a long chase. They are trying to arrive in the short window when the defense network is busy proving it still works. A few minutes later, the rhythm at Belbek changes. Point defense crews shift between tracks faster than the system likes, and the engagement picture becomes crowded with returns that are not all equally real. The base is still defended, but its attention is split, and split attention is the only opening a low-signature approach needs. Then the operation turns from shaping to contact. A localized hit on a nearby air defense position forces crews to reposition, and repositioning creates gaps. The airfield's protection is not erased, but it is bent, and bent is enough when the objective is a fast strike against parked aircraft. Inside the shelters, every second matters. Aircraft on the ground cannot maneuver, and taxi movement becomes a risk when the threat is not a single missile track but a layered pattern of small, hard-to-classify targets. The defenders are no longer choosing the perfect response. They are choosing the fastest response. By the time the base understands that this is not a probe, the sequence is already inside the perimeter logic. The next moments will decide whether the defenders can re-stitch their radar picture in time, or whether Belbek's most valuable assets are about to be caught, still, exposed, and unable to lift. If you want the clean, step-by-step timeline of how the decoys pulled the defenses wide and what hit next inside Belbek, subscribe so you do not miss the second half of this sequence. December 25, 3:30 a.m. 2 days before the Belbek strike, the setup begins in a way that does not look like a setup at all. A first wave of Ukrainian drones pushes toward Crimea with one job: force the air defense network to show its habits under pressure. These are not expensive platforms, and they are not meant to survive. They are decoys built to be noticed, carrying radar reflectors designed to inflate their signature so that on a Russian screen they read larger and more urgent than they really are. From the Russian side, the logic is simple. If something appears on scope with the profile of a serious threat, it gets engaged early, before it can get close enough to create uncertainty. That doctrine is exactly what the decoys are designed to trigger. Once the first tracks are called out, the response starts to stack. Point defense crews begin rotating between lanes, switching targets, and firing into corridors that suddenly feel crowded. Even though the real danger is not the number of objects, but the attention they consume. The decoys do not need to hit anything to succeed. They only need to pull the network into a predictable pattern, where radar operators spend time verifying, air defense crews commit interceptors, and everyone starts chasing what looks like the largest return. That is when the second layer moves, quieter and harder to classify. A smaller set of strike drones, described in the script as SBU Alpha FP2 platforms, comes in low with guidance that does not rely on constant radio control. They are built to keep moving even when jamming is present, and they aim for something that matters more than a single launcher. They aim for the eyes. One target is a Nebo SVU radar, the kind of sensor that helps expand early warning and tracking. Another is the engagement radar that feeds long-range air defense decisions, the system that turns a detection into a firing solution. If those sensors can be disrupted, even briefly, the entire bubble changes character. A defended zone can still have launchers and missiles, but without clean targeting data, it becomes reactive instead of predictive. Russian crews do manage to fight back. According to the script, at least 2 of the incoming FP-2 drones are stopped, one with direct fire and another with a shoulder launch system. But the deeper issue is that every shot fired and every second spent on the decoys reduces the ability to respond to the low, quiet tracks arriving behind them. By the time defenders realize the second layer is not just another set of decoys, the engagement window has narrowed. A Panzer battery shifts to reacquire targets, and in that moment of repositioning, it becomes vulnerable to being hit while it is exposed and committed. The script sequence then escalates to a shock point. A Russian MiG-31, on alert duty and positioned as part of the broader Crimea air defense posture, is described as being struck on the ground during this first phase. The implication is not that the base loses everything at once, but that its confidence in control is punctured in a way that cannot be patched quickly. When a radar is degraded and a point defense unit is damaged, the recovery is never instantaneous. Replacement systems are not parked around the corner, and the next crews who step into the shift do so with the knowledge that the air picture can be manipulated. That is why the 48-hour gap matters. Russia does not simply return to normal. It adapts, but it adapts under stress. Over the next 2 days, defenders lean more heavily on visual observers, legacy guns like Zu-232 positions, and shoulder-fired missiles, because those tools do not require a perfect radar picture. The trade-off is that those tools shrink the warning window, and a shorter warning window makes the final outcome depend on seconds. And that is the bridge into December 27, 3:30 a.m. at Belbek. The strike is not a single night of luck. It is a 2-stage sequence where the first stage bends the defense network, and the second stage exploits the bend before it can fully straighten. December 27, 3:30 a.m. The moment Belbek settles into routine is the moment the second phase arrives. The first wave is already in the air, not to destroy anything, but to crowd the picture and pull every point defense crew into the same reflex, engage what looks obvious before it gets close. Decoy drones push in along multiple lanes, carrying reflectors that inflate their signature just enough to demand attention. On radar, they read large and urgent, and that forces Panzer crews to rotate, reacquire, and spend their cleanest seconds locking onto targets that were never meant to be the real threat. While those systems are busy chasing the loudest returns, the actual strike element approaches on a different logic. The platforms described in the original script as FP-2 ghost drones stay low and minimize what shoulder-fired teams rely on to get a stable lock, turning the final approach into a visual problem rather than a radar problem. This is where the base's posture becomes a trap. When radar confidence drops, crews default to guns and manpads, but guns need time to track, and manpads need a clean signature. The ghost approach is built for that exact scene, arriving in the short space between detection and certainty. A few seconds later, the perimeter is no longer a line. It is a series of disconnected reactions. One position opens fire at a decoy, another tracks something that disappears behind terrain, and a third hesitates because the target does not look like the threat profile they were trained to expect. Then the strike turns inward. One FP-2 drone clears the outer ring and commits toward the aircraft shelters, flying a path that is too low and too late to be handled by the systems that were designed to protect the base from higher, cleaner tracks. Inside a hardened shelter, a Su-27 is still on the ground, protected by concrete, but not protected from an attack designed to exploit doors, gaps, and short-range blind spots. A second FP-2 does not follow it. It angles toward the flight line, where movement becomes vulnerability, and where a jet preparing to taxi has no room to maneuver or disappear. Belbek is built to launch fighters quickly, but speed on the ground does not matter if the threat is already inside the last few seconds of approach. 3:31 a.m. The first impact hits, and the effect is immediate, a sudden flash and a sharp change in the base's posture as crews realize this is not just harassment at the perimeter. The shelter line becomes a focal point, and that shift of attention opens the runway side even wider. Almost instantly, the second hit follows, landing before the defense picture can be rebuilt. In the space of a few seconds, the script's double-kill moment resolves, not as a prolonged battle, but as a compressed sequence where the base never gets back ahead of the timeline. The reason it happens that fast is not luck, it is sequencing. The decoys pull the network into a familiar rhythm. The ghost drones exploit the short-range seam, and the targets are chosen to maximize shock. One aircraft caught where it should have been safest and another caught in the worst possible transition, neither fully protected, neither able to respond. In the aftermath, the base does not just lose hardware, it loses certainty. Every defender on the line has to ask the same question as the smoke rises, whether the next radar return is real, whether the next quiet track is another ghost, and whether Belbek is about to be hit again before anyone can reset their posture. And as crews scramble to lock down the runway and pull surviving aircraft deeper into cover, the deeper problem becomes clear. If a layered defense bubble can be forced to chase decoys and then be pierced at ground level, the next targets in Crimea are no longer defined by distance, they are defined by timing. In the minutes after the double hit, Belbek does not fall into silence. It fills with frantic motion, because an airbase can survive damage, but it cannot survive uncertainty. Crews do not know if the strike is finished or if it was only the opening cut before a larger wave arrives, and that lack of clarity forces every decision to be defensive. Command orders the obvious steps first. Taxiways are restricted, surviving aircraft are pulled deeper into hardened positions, and point defense teams are told to reset, reorient, and rebuild a coherent picture. The problem is that coherence depends on sensors, and sensors are exactly what the earlier phase had already pressured. The defenders shift toward what still feels reliable. Visual observers are posted wider. Legacy guns are repositioned to cover likely low-altitude lanes. Manpad's teams spread out along the perimeter, trying to create overlapping engagement zones that do not depend on a stable radar track. But that solution creates a new weakness. A defense posture built around eyes and shoulder-fired missiles is a defense posture built around seconds. It is reactive by nature, and reactive systems lose when the attacker controls the timeline. Inside the base, the damage is not only in burned metal, it is in tempo. Flight schedules stall. Maintenance crews cannot work freely while the perimeter is still hot. Vehicles move slower, lights stay low, and every sound carries, because everyone is watching the sky for the next low, quiet approach. Further up the chain, Russian planners confront the harder truth. If this was a two-stage sequence, then the second stage could be repeated. The question becomes whether Belbek is the target, or whether Belbek was the demonstration, the proof that the air defense bubble can be bent and pierced when decoys, low-signature drones, and timing are combined. By dawn, the base is still standing, but it is no longer confident. It is shifted from operating to guarding, and that shift is exactly what a pressure campaign is meant to produce. By morning, the most damaging effect at Belbek is not the smoke, it is the recalculation. A fighter lost on the ground is not just a loss of airframe, it is a loss of readiness, because every surviving jet now carries an added constraint. It cannot simply sit exposed, it cannot move casually, and it cannot assume that the perimeter will provide early warning against low, quiet threats. That change ripples outward. When a base shifts from routine operations to constant guarding, the pace of sorties slows, maintenance becomes harder to schedule, and command starts dispersing assets to reduce the chance of another concentrated loss. Dispersion sounds like safety, but it also creates new patterns, more transport, more movement, and more chances for an attacker to identify the next weak spot. For Russian air defense planners, the lesson is uncomfortable. The most expensive systems are built to see far and engage clean tracks, but the decisive moment at Belbek comes from targets that arrive late, low, and hard to classify. If the defense network has to spend time chasing decoys and rebuilding its picture, the attacker wins the only resource that matters in the last mile: seconds. For Ukraine, the message is equally clear in the logic of the script. This is not framed as one dramatic night. It is framed as a method, a way to first bend the sensor network, then exploit the scene and force the defender into a posture where every day begins with caution instead of confidence. And that is why the story does not end with 2 aircraft. It ends with the question of what happens when the same approach is applied to other nodes, other bases, and other logistics points across Crimea. Because after Belbek, the most dangerous target is not the one that is visible. It is the one that still believes it is protected. If you want the next breakdown on how these layered strike patterns evolve and what sites become vulnerable next, subscribe so you do not miss the next timeline when the next window opens.